Recording.
Okay.
So just finish the story from where you are. That's
Frank
good.
is dating somebody.
Well, he started to date one of the nurses at the hospital that he worked for. And we were still, Josephine and Agatha were still helping him with the little boy. And then when he decided, he thought that he could use one of her other sisters. So he said that maybe if Josephine and Agatha would want to take a rest from taking care of the children, then maybe one of the other sisters could come and stay with him. And so then he had a sister, Catherine, that came, and she was an older sister, Catherine, and she was the one that stayed then with him for a while until he started to think about marriage, and he asked this nurse if she would be willing to marry him and help him raise his son. And so she said that she would love to. But in the meantime, Catherine didn't seem to have any problems.
What was the
She
nurse's
said,
name, do you know?
She said, no, I didn't. Wouldn't know what her name was.
Okay.
But this Catherine said that she would hear a noise every once in a while, maybe in the hallway, but she didn't think that it was anything serious, like the other two sisters felt like there was something going on. And their thoughts were, my two sisters, Josephine and Agatha, thought that maybe that this was a message that that he was having from his a wife who died, that he should get somebody to have as a mother for her baby, so that this way that if he married someone that would have been nice, and that would have been a mother for her child. And so this is what happened, and this might have been maybe a year later that he decided that he would marry this girl, and then they raised this Michael, and I guess they had no problems after that.
Did they stay in that house?
They lived there,
Yeah.
they lived there for a while, and until I guess they were able to buy their own homes of some kind, or maybe they even moved in the city. I don't really know what happened
Okay.
after that.
Tell her the other story.
You want to turn this off now? So now I just wanted to give her one story.
No, I like the other story better.
That's
yeah.
not any ghosts. Where's the ghost?
Well, when Busha told me, she told it scarier. When she used to talk about the noise on the porch, because she's the one who actually heard it, So she used to talk about how she'd hear this noise, and then when she'd go there, and there's nobody there.
Yeah,
And then when she described the geese running back and forth, she just made it like, ooh, who's chasing the geese? When she goes and looks and there's nobody there. So she was really spooked. But this other story is the real ghost story, so tell her
Did you
that
see
one.
a ghost? Does anyone see any
no,
ghosts?
no, you don't. No, they don't see the ghosts. They just.
Well,
But-
Grandma says
but-
no, but when Busha told me the story, in the second story,
Yeah.
she saw a hand that should not have been there. That's
hand?
A hand. But that was all
On
that
the
she
bed.
told me.
A hand on the bed?
Yes.
Ooh,
but
that's
that,
a good one, Greg. Tell me that one. I
yes.
could do hands on the bed.
But that was it. So tell me the other story.
So the other story would have been, let me see, who would be this? All right, does this stop now?
Yeah, we gotta turn that back on.
Okay, this is the next story now.
Oh, you're already taping it.
Yes.
Right now.
That was,
This was the older sister?
yeah, this was,
This is the hand on the
Was
bed.
this Busha's older sister?
yeah, this was another sister who was, let's see,
She was married.
she was married, and when they get married, they all had to take their own home somewhere. So they had a little home, again on a farm, because these were all country living, people living in the country, and so they had their little farms. So when they got married, her name was Stephanie, and let's see, Stephanie, I forget what his name was. Stop it for a minute, let me think. In those years, there were wars that were fought, and when they needed people to come and serve, they just would call and say that you have to come and serve in the army. And so those years they had to leave their home and go and fight and help their country. So when he was called to go into service, she was left alone in this her little farmhouse. So because she had other sisters, she asked her mother to let one of her sisters stay with her. So first was the oldest one, which was Catherine, came to stay with her, and so she stayed with her for a while, and they lived in that. They had their little farm that they took care of, and the little poultry that they had on the farm, and then when they stayed there together, and there was a long time, and there were no telephones, no way of getting any information about a person. When he's gone to war, you don't hear from where they are or where they're fighting. All you know is they're somewhere out there and they're battling and to protect their country. So there were no communication for them from one another. So there was a long time in between that Catherine stayed for a while, and then there was another sister that came to stay, and that there was so that first was Catherine, and this was the sister that was Stephanie, right? Was it?
That was the one.
Yeah. So that was the two sisters that were staying there, and then
Josephine.
and then Catherine said that she wanted to leave, that she had things that she wanted to do on her own because she wanted to. She was a little older, and she wanted to get started in a home of her own, and she had a friend that she was visiting with all the time, so she had like a boyfriend, and so because they lived in a little town away from there, so they weren't that close. So then they said, well, all right, we'll send Josephine, and Josephine will stay for a while. So when the one day they were all sitting in their kitchen, and they were sitting around a table, and one was reading and one was crocheting, you know how they do in the country homes, to pass their time. And all of a sudden they hear a noise on the window. And they thought, well, they didn't see. They looked back and they didn't see anybody. So they all heard the noise. So they thought, well, maybe someone might have been walking by or something and made this noise. So then there was another night again, and they also heard this noise again, and they heard this noise on the window.
Wasn't it like a tapping?
Yeah, and so then they just sat there, and they thought, well, I don't know what this could be, that somebody is trying to play a trick on us or whatever. So then there was another night, and when they heard the noise, the one sister said, she got angry, and she says, stop your knocking. Don't knock on my windows. Just if you want to come in to talk to me, then come in and say something and knock on the door and I'll let you in. And but don't go around knocking on my windows.
Just come in.
Who was this, Stephanie?
Stephanie. And so then they just
Nobody came.
nobody came, and so they just kind of looked at one another, and they thought, well, that's funny that there's someone knocking, and still there's nobody here coming in. So and they didn't want to go out because it was late at night. So then in those years, they had beds that were made. They're just like made of straw with, they didn't have mattresses and springs like we have today. They had just regular country straw, and they'd cover it with sheets, and they had the pillows made of down feathers, and that they would make their own covers and make their own bed covers and comforters. And so they're
the comforters would be like big down?
yeah, they were down comforters because they would prepare those from their own the
Like
ducks.
if they were-
Yeah,
I have a
ducks
question.
and
have a
geese back.
question?
Yeah. Okay, stop.
What happens when they knock on the windows,
Yeah.
why wouldn't they just look in the windows that they heard the knocking on?
Well, they did look, but they never saw
So
anyone.
they'd be standing like this window right here, they'd be standing
Yeah.
looking out and they'd hear knocking on it.
Yeah.
They wouldn't see a
Well,
person.
somebody could knock on a window and just walk by. By the time you look, it's gone.
So wouldn't they wait there?
No, they wouldn't. They didn't wait.
I'd look out the window still. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So anyway, so this was this one night. Then they decided that they were going to go to bed, and so they all got into the bed, and they were
There were 3 sisters, right?
yeah, 3. Yeah.
And they all would sleep in the one big bed.
Yeah, they had big beds. So they had, so they went to bed, and then all of a sudden they heard something outside the door, and they thought, well, whatever it is, now you can hear it outside the door.
So it's outside the door of the house or outside the door of the bedroom?
Outside the door of the house, because they didn't have separated rooms. They had the bed and the maybe kitchen. It was all in one.
Yeah.
That's the way the country homes were
So it's like
in
a
those
big
years.
cabin?
Yeah, it was a big cabin then.
Okay.
So they would have the bed in one room of the house, and the kitchen would be near where the fireplace was, where they would do their cooking.
Yeah.
And so they heard some noise by the door, and so they said, well, I wonder who's making the noise now? That you're knocking on the windows now. You're knocking around the door. So if you're there, then come on in. And still nobody came in. So they opened the door and didn't see anyone, and then they just went to bed. So then the next few nights went by, and then they went to bed that one night, and the 3 of them are laying in the bed, and it felt like somebody was pulling on the comforter. It felt like.
Debbie, I told you.
So it sounded like somebody was kind of pulling on the comforter, and so the one would move the other one, and she'd say, do you feel something? Is that you pulling on the comforter? And then she said, no. So she said, no, I don't see anyone. And so she said, oh, you're just imagining things. You're just imagining things. Well, just go to sleep. And so then they all went to sleep and didn't hear anymore. So then it was another couple nights later, and again they were laying in the bed, and then this Stephanie, the oldest one, said that I can hear now that there is something moving on the bed cover, pulling on the bed cover, and the sister, the Josephine, she said to her, let me get on that side. She says, you get in the middle, let me sit on that side, and I will see. So she let her get in the middle, and she took the end side of the bed, and she said that they were laying there and kind of waiting to see, and all of a sudden she felt that there was something pulling on the bed cover. And so she took her leg, this Josephine put her leg out on the outside of the bed, and she swished it back and forth to see if she can kick something. And she thought if something was there, she would kick it, and she would feel it. And so she went, kicked one and kicked it back the other way, and kicked one way and the back the other way, and she didn't feel anything. So then she pulled her leg back in the bed, and then she got frightened. And so she's laying there, and she didn't say anything, but she was frightened because she says she didn't kick anything. If anything would have been there, she would have felt it.
Yeah.
So then she said that the third sister, that Agatha, was there, but she was sitting on the other side because Catherine had already gone, and it was just Stephanie and Josephine and Agatha. So they were there, and then that one night they went to bed again, and they always checked to make sure that there was nothing around the house, and so they were always careful after this, and they were aware, and yet there would be nobody that they can tell about it. So that it was all just between the three of them. So then they went to bed this one day, and then again they're laying in the bed, and this would happen shortly after they would go to sleep usually. So they're laying in the bed, and all of a sudden Josephine looks up, and she sees this fingers on the top of the bed board, the wooden board, and she looked up and she saw these fingers scratching on top of the bed board, and she said, and she jumped up and she says, "Whoever you are, what you doing here?" And she says, "You get out of here, or we'll get somebody to help." And she says, "Get out of here and don't bother us anymore." And so then the two sisters sat up, and she said, "Well, I just happened to look up and I saw this hand behind me." And she says, "I saw the three fingers on this headboard." And
Like from behind, like this, or like a hand touching this way.
Well, whatever way if she saw the fingers, they have to be
She
facing.
described it to me, she said it was scratching on the headboard.
So she was laying, like her head would be right here.
Yeah.
And the hand
And
was
she
like
sat
that.
up and saw this hand.
Uh-huh. This
And no arm to it.
Yeah.
No, she just said that she saw three fingers.
Yeah.
I don't know why it was only three fingers. She saw three fingers scratching.
3 fingers that he only had 3 fingers, or 3
No.
fingers of who
I
she was
think
able
that
to
she just
see?
could see three fingers. But the way she described it to me, she was talking about how it sounded that the scratching on the wood.
Yeah.
That she heard the
Well, that's
scratching.
what she heard.
So I think that's what made her turn around and look up.
Yeah.
That she heard the scratching above her head on the wood, and then when she turned around, she saw these three fingers. And it's funny that we mentioned the three fingers, because I remember
Yeah.
Busha saying that she could only see
Yeah.
three fingers.
So anyway, they talked about it the next day, and they
Did she wake up the other people?
they all heard her, because she got up and she started to holler that, "Well, what are you coming here to scare us, or what are you trying to do? Why don't you come in the daytime when we can talk to you?" Because at night there, they don't have lights and everything,
It's all
usually it's
dark.
candles and everything like that.
Yeah.
Maybe they saw that because the sunlight, the moon was shining in, and maybe you could see a little something, so she saw the fingers, in the moonlight from the outside, from the
Yeah.
window. But otherwise, you don't have lights in there. So then they decided the next day that they were going to close up and go to stay with the mother for a
Now for
while.
this stuff, I
So
think I'd leave too.
because the other girls, nobody wanted to stay with Stephanie.
No one wanted to stay.
Yeah. So they decided that what they would do is, instead of waiting, for anything to happen, that they would just go and stay with the mother until they would hear what from her husband.
Just wait for the husband
Yeah,
to come back.
when he would come back. And what actually happened was that they were notified after maybe a year after he was gone that he died. So
He
the
was killed
government
in
in action, yeah.
Oh.
So he was killed in action. And so then they decided that, so they lived with the parents, with their parents, until they heard from that. And so then she went and remarried again. So what they did with that little home that she had built first time, then they decided that they would knock it down. But before they did that, she said that she had a dream. This Stephanie had a dream. And in the dream, she said that she saw her husband come into the house and said, "Don't wait for me anymore. I'm not going to be back anymore." And he said, "But you'll have to check around the fireplace, and somewhere around the fireplace there will be some money that would be there for you." And he said, "I put it there." And so she thought, well, maybe it was just a dream. And so she said that she didn't think too much about it at the time, but then when she was talking again with her family, and she thought, well, maybe I'll say that what my dream was, and see what would have been the meaning of that dream. And so they said, well, what we'll do, because this was already, she was after her second marriage, and she said that, well, what we'll do is we'll have a larger home built there, and right where the fireplace will be, we'll build a little bigger fireplace, because what they had was just for 2 people at the time. So they knocked the house down and built a bigger house, and we're adding to the house and working around the fireplace. And there they found a note with some money in it that he had saved, that in case he would not return, that there would be some money for her to be able to get started in some kind of a living.
She didn't know that was there
And
until
she didn't know,
heard it in the dream.
and so that was what they kept saying then later, that they didn't realize that might have been a message that he was trying to get to her somehow, but he was not able to get in touch with her in any way. And this was maybe after he had already been killed, that this was
So his
his
ghost came
spirit,
in a
that
dream.
his spirit came, yeah.
So that's what they thought the noises were, that it was
Yeah.
this guy trying to tell his wife to look in the
Yeah.
fireplace.
So it all started with
So
noise.
was that guy, was he dead already when they heard all these weird noises?
Well,
and saw the
they
hand
don't
and
know
everything?
exactly when he died. He was just found killed in action, and they knew by their tags, that they usually have, that he was killed. So then they sent a letter. So that was their only way to communicate, is through these letters. That was.
So then when she tore down the house, she found this in the fireplace, that he left her money in a note.
It was in between the brick. It was some kind of a brick was there that you could remove that brick, and there was a message in there for her with that
So
money.
see, I think that's a good story, isn't it? That's a good story.
So that was, and so then, but they still lived in that house afterward, that after they built that house.
Yeah, but they
And-
remodeled it, right?
Yeah, they
Changed it.
built a bigger house
Yeah.
than later, yeah.
Did you have any other ghost stories? I'm thinking there was
No.
something else.
I don't know.
Well, wait, Fred,
wanna
I
shut
want
this
you to
off?
tell me the story about, I was trying to remember the story about when they had the beer bottles in the Prohibition, and was it your
yeah.
mother that broke the bottle?
Those are in this America, yeah.
You should tell me that one.
Yeah,
That'd be a cool
well, you
story.
wanna, well, you can't tell them all at this one time. I'll
What?
give you a different story the next time.
Well, what if I read a movie about Prohibition?
You wanna try, you wanna turn this off now?
You should tape that one too. I was trying to tell my friends a story about my great-grandmother that during Prohibition she had a bar and the police came in and I couldn't tell it right. That she broke the beer and was like, "There, you got no evidence. Sorry, pal. Later."
I don't think it was beer. Was it a beer bottle?
Liquor?
With liquor in it?
Yeah.
It was a beer bottle.
Yeah.
And he was a police detective?
Well, the story here was, let me try to think now. I think this was when the people came to America. This was when my parents came to America again this time. So they came when my mother was just 17 years old. Her name was Agatha. My dad was John, and
How old was he?
he was 25. No, at that time, he's 9 years older than her, so if she was 16, he would have been 25, right? Yeah. So when they came to this country, they came with very little, because when they were married, the parents, each parent gave them some money for like an inheritance. So they called it like an endowment. What would they call that? Dowry?
When the wife.
Yeah.
I thought it was what the wife has to offer the different husbands.
Well.
That's what she saves
No,
up for her marriage.
this was the father, the parents of the groom and the parents of the bride each gave money to them. And so maybe 2 weeks after they were married, they decided to come to America. So they were on their way to America, and at that time there were a lot of people coming to America from their country. And so when they were on their way to the country, they were on this ship with people packed from top to bottom, and then all of a sudden the ship was going, and there was such big, huge waves, and the ship was rocking from one side to the other, and going from one side to the other, because the waves were so big, and it was a very stormy time in the middle of the ocean. And so then all of a sudden they had motor trouble, and they couldn't do anything. The motors
Not
stopped.
moving in the middle of the ocean.
They're standing in this big storm in the middle of the ocean, and the motors were shut off because they had problems, and so then everyone was notified that they can't do anything until they get some help. So what they did was they turned on a distress signal, and my mother would say that all they heard for I don't know how many days, 2 or 3 days, that they were stranded in the middle of that ocean. And then it got a little calmer, but until the storm blew over, they were bounced around from this, and everyone was told to put their life preservers on and just sit and wait and pray that they will get help. So they had this distress signal for days that they were listening, and it would go woo, woo. That's the kind of sound it would be, woo, that would go all over the ocean, so it would be heard far away, that if anyone was in the area, that they could come and help them. So then finally their signal got
a big whistle, or what would you call it on the boat? You know that big
Yeah.
chimney that they do?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Because I can remember Busha telling me that story and how
Yeah.
she'd imitate that sound.
Yeah.
And say how scary that was.
Yeah.
Did she tell you this in English or in Polish?
In English.
Well, she used to talk English. It's just that she talked broken English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then she says, finally, then there came this ship that got the message. The ship came, and whatever the problem was, they finally had taken care of that problem. And until that ship came and got the motors running again, they thought that they would never have made it to this country, because everybody was living in these lifesavers. And so then finally when they came to this country, then my mother's sister was here, living here already, so she already made arrangements for a place for them to stay until they were here. And so then when my dad went and found some work, then he was working, and they got their own living quarters, and then this was after a while. Then these were Depression years, and it was hard to find work. So he thought that my dad thought that he would open a small business of some kind, and maybe that would help him to support his family. So during those years, the beer was allowed and wine was allowed, but liquor and the beer, you know. So this one time, they had these plainclothes people who would watch, and they would they were detectives, and they would walk from one place into another, and they'd just come unexpectedly. And when they would come, they would just open their coats and show that they're police, you know. So they would show you that they're police, and then they were allowed to come and look behind your bar and see if you had liquor.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't stop them because this was their permission, because this was still not allowed to have. So when they went into a little larger place, and they felt that it would be a better location for this business because it was closer to where the gate where the people come from work. And at that time, there were no cars, you know, there were only street cars, and you walk home.
Yeah.
So people didn't get in a car and drive home or drive away from the company. Everybody came out of that gate, they'd stop for a drink or stop for a little sandwich or whatever you'd have to serve them, and whatever they had a taste for, and then they'd walk home or take one of the street cars and go home, you know. So this one time, my mom was helping my dad behind this bar, and they had beer bottles that they would wash, and instead of having it in a regular liquor bottle, they would put the whiskey that they would fix, you know, and they would put it into these beer bottles. And so they had them marked to show which one was the one that had the liquor in it, because normally they would just order the beer, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So this one time, my mother was helping my dad behind this bar, and she said that they were talking between the people that were there, and so they talked like you would at a bar, you know, everybody joins in the conversation, and a lot of people knew each other. So then they're talking away, and all of a sudden, she's pouring this little glass of the drink from this beer bottle, you know, into this guy's glass, and she looks and she recognizes this police detective coming in. So she looked up, and and he walks in, and he said hello, and she says hello, and so she took this bottle of liquor and she put it in front of this man in this beer bottle, and so he came by. And he said to her, well, what are you serving today? And she says, what I serve every day. I just serve beer and sandwiches. And so he went around, and he's looking behind the bar, and he's walking around. And then you know, she said, so what are you looking for? And he says, well, I'm looking to see if you have any alcohol. And she said, no, I don't have any. And sorry, and so he looked around, And then he looked and he saw that bottle in front of this man, and he took the bottle and he smelled the bottle, and he smelled that it was alcohol. So he took that bottle from there and he says, well, what's this? And he poured it in. He says, give me a glass. And he poured it into a glass. And then he smelled it again and he says, well, this looks like liquor to me, alcohol here, you know. So she says, well, whatever you think it is. He says, well, you're under arrest. And she says, well, okay, I'm under arrest. And so she took he took this bottle and he put it in his pocket, in his coat pocket. And so he's writing out this ticket, you know, that she's under arrest and that she'll have to go with him to the station and that they're going to punish them and pay, and then she'll have to pay a fine. And so...
Wasn't he looking for more stuff?
Yeah, they kept looking all over to see, you know, but they had different hiding places for it, you know, where they wouldn't know, but where they kept alcohol. So then she went out from behind the bar, and she's walking behind him, kind of looking at him, you know, and she saw this bottle sticking out from his pocket, and there were these rails, you know, they had, in the bars, they had rails where the guys would put their foot on the rail, and then they had, at that time, that a lot of people would chew tobacco, and they'd have these spittoons there,
Yeah.
so they would spit,
Yeah.
spit on the spittoons, you know. I don't know even if you should, I shouldn't even say that.
Oh,
'cause
that's
that-
cool. That's the part you put in the movie. That's the cool part of it.
Oh, yeah.
Where you guys went,
So anyway, she's, you know, they had that rail along this bar where if you put their foot on the rail and then you'd stand, and sometimes they'd have a chair, so they'd sit on a chair, or other they'd stand and put the foot on the bar, on the rail. So she's walking behind him and she sees this, and so she walked over to the door, and he's kind of watching where she's going, you know. He thought so maybe she wouldn't walk out the door and run away on him, you know. So then she turns around and she's walking back, and he's riding. He sees her walking back, and he's riding in that. And she walked up to him, and she reached for the bottle and bang against the pipe, and she hit that bottle. She hit that bottle against that pipe, and that bottle shattered to pieces. And he jumped around, and he said, "What did you do?" And she said, "What did I do? I didn't do nothing. I broke the bottle. It's my bottle, I broke it." And so he said, "Well, you're going to jail now." He says, "You're under arrest."
She said, that's my bottle.
Yeah.
I broke it.
That's my property. And so,
But yeah, did she know this, or she thought of this at the time, or did her
Well, she-
husband say, if cops
No.
ever come in and
No.
break the evidence?
no, she didn't know. They didn't know that. you
She
know.
just thought that this
No,
was
she
her
just,
way out.
She just thought that she'd just break it, that he won't have
Oh, I
to.
think she knew, Mom, that if he didn't have the evidence, what could he do to her?
Well, I don't know, because,
Sure,
you
why
know,
else would she break it?
I think they found out when they went, because she could have been arrested just for that, because of his word.
Yeah.
But the judge said, you
don't have any
you don't
evidence.
have
So
any.
she got taken in anyway, but
Yeah,
the judge said,
yeah.
where's the evidence? And
Yeah,
he said,
they-
she broke it.
Right. So
So they let her go.
so they took her in. You know, that was the only time she rode in the paddy wagon. She said,
Oh,
in
yeah.
all her years of business, that was the only time she rode in the paddy
All right,
wagon.
what was the story that you
But
told me?
but then when they went in front of the judge, then the judge he went into and told the judge what happened, that she walked by and she took the bottle and broke it on that rail, and it broke the bottle and shattered it. So he says, "So what? Where's your proof?" And he says, "Well, I don't have it because she broke it." He says, "Well, if you don't have any proof, then your case is dismissed." And so that way is how she got away with it.
But you started telling the story about how she put this bottle in front of the other guy.
Yeah.
And there was one time where she had liquor and put it in front of
Yeah.
the guy that was a customer.
Yeah.
And the police came through and never checked
Yeah,
it.
that was another time.
And then when that policeman left, this man that was sitting there with this liquor right in front of him was dying because Pusha put this bottle of liquor.
Wouldn't he have gotten in trouble?
I think so, because he would have been drinking it, which he was.
Yeah.
You know, but she put it right in front of him,
Yeah.
and then he's just sitting there
Well, because that's what, that was done, right?
So
You
it was
know,
liquor in a beer bottle,
that was,
and
yeah.
she put it in front of this guy.
So see, that happened, in fact, many times even before or after that
Yeah.
happened. But I was just talking about the time when she
Yeah.
got in trouble.
But then when the
And-
police left that time, I know you said,
Yeah.
he looked at her and he said, whoa, what did you do,
Yeah.
you know?
And so then another thing that happened was that they were still in business, and this was at a time when there was a strike. The people were striking. And at that time, they had police on horses. And my mother told me that I was maybe about 2 years old, and then Uncle Wally was about 4. And so when we were in business on this street where it was a business street, and the strike was in these companies where everybody was striking there, so nobody was working, and the police were on these horses walking around, and they wouldn't let anybody go near where the strike was. So my mother and my brother and I, we went to the store, and we were coming back from the store, and we were going back to our place where we lived, because wherever the business was, we lived behind it. You know, so we had living quarters behind the business. So we were walking with my mom, and we had a few things from the grocery store, and we were walking. And at that time, we were open for business, but there weren't many people because everybody was on strike, so they weren't, they didn't have money to buy drinks to begin with. So we were just kind of existing at that time. So she's walking, and this policeman kept coming back in front of her like this with this horse, and he says, "You can't come here, you can't come here." And he's moving that horse back and forth in front of her, and she said, "I live here." And he said, "You can't go here. You have to go somewhere else. You can't come here. We're here to say nobody is allowed here." And she was not far from where her home was. She was walking, and he kept coming back and forth. And she looked at him. She said, "What's the matter with you? Don't you understand? I live here. I have to get to my home." And he says, "You can't come. This is closed to everybody." And she went like this and hit the horse, and the horse went up with his feet, and she took my brother and me, and she ran under the horse, and she just went for the house. And she says she just left, and then he didn't bother her. He just said, "What are you doing?" He says, "What are you doing?" But she says she knew the horses, because in the country where they were raised, she used to ride horses and
The horse
everything.
didn't scare her.
No. And so she hit the horse, and the horse went up, and she said she ran under and went for the house, and she says, I'm going to my home. Don't you bother me."
What was the strike for? Why were?
Well, they were looking for more money because they were only earning maybe
Is this
10.
Depression time?
Yeah, that was
Is
depression.
this before or after the beer bottle?
Oh,
thing?
this was maybe in this was after.
She got in trouble with the cops a lot.
Yeah, she did. This was, I think, before. This might have been about 1919 this happened, because I was only 2 years old at that time.
1919,
Yeah.
so you were born in 1970.
Yeah, so that's when that
And tell,
happened.
what I wanted to ask you is, she used to send you to get some liquor or something. What's that story? As a little kid, you used to go and get something.
No, that was not. She made beer. She made beer, and one of her friends wanted a beer. So my dad and my mom, they knew how to. I don't know. You put
Did they
the
make
beer.
it like in a bathtub?
No, not in a
No?
tub. No, they had like bins
Yeah.
of some kind, I don't know what they were. The
Those big
glass.
silver ones?
No, they were glass containers, and you had to have it ferment or something. I don't know how they made that, because I don't know how that beer
Yeah.
was made. But they knew how to make beer,
Yeah.
so they made their beer.
Yeah.
And so when these people, they said, they were friends, and they said, "Well, if you make some beer, then make some beer for me and bring some." So I used to take that beer over to those people.
Yeah, but didn't you have it hidden somehow?
Well, I had it in a bag. I carried it in a bag.
Yeah.
So little Granny Jane brought the beer to
And
people.
how old were you then?
Oh, I was only about maybe 7, 8.
Yeah.
Do you remember the horse thing?
Do you
What
remember
horse?
that horse jumping up like that?
Oh
Is
no,
that
I
some-
don't remember.
She
I
told
just
you that
yeah,
story?
yeah, just my mom told me about it. Yeah, but she said, well, how can he stop me from going to my home?
Right.
She says, I'll report you. You
Right.
know, she knew her rights. Yeah, she was no dummy. She
No,
she didn't
smart.
have. She was a smart person.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was no dummy.
The other story I remember that you told me is when there was a murder committed next door to you. And you were in the store just before the murder happened.
Yeah, well, that's a whole big story. That's a whole
Well,
new
just
story.
a shortened version of that. Can you do a
Shortened
shortened
yeah,
version?
sure. I
They
think you're
made
gonna
a
be here.
movie out of this one,
Yeah.
gosh, already.
They
Yeah.
did?
Yeah.
They did, yeah.
What was the movie called? Spencer? Who was in it?
That,
Jimmy Stewart was in it.
It was Northside 777, and Jim Stewart
Jimmy
was
Stewart
in it. Yeah.
played the reporter.
Yeah.
What's it called?
Northside 777. And I was thinking of making a story and sending it because the woman, well, you got to start from the beginning, you know. I just thought that maybe the person who was finally punished for that, he was put into prison because of that murder. His mother finally had him freed because that's the story that
In that
James
movie.
Stewart was in. So,
James Stewart was a reporter,
yeah,
and he
we were,
started to investigate this murder because of the mother. The mother was a cleaning woman, and she used to save all her money and try to help her son. And I think she notified the newspaper that her son is innocent, and would you please help him?
Yeah.
Because he's in jail for a murder he didn't
So what
commit.
happened to the murder?
And
Well-
so the whole story is around this reporter
Let-
finding out the true
all
story.
right, let me tell you a quick story of what happened there. This was, because I don't think you'll have enough of room on this tape. This was a story, again, where we had a little restaurant, and so I was already about 14, 15, I think I was about 15 years old at the time. And my parents had this little, the same thing, this little beer place and sandwiches. We had sandwiches and beer. And next door was a grocery store. And she had candy and bread and just a small grocery store. It was not big with a lot of meat or anything. It was just a little, like a 7-Eleven shop. And so this lady was living in this place, and she had living quarters in the back, and in front was this little store. And so she had, when you opened the door, she had like a little bell that would ring, you know, when you opened the door. So a lot of times when we didn't go to the store to buy up everything, so she was close if I needed a loaf of bread or maybe some cake or something for the kid, you know, they wanted for the kids, my brother and for me. And then I would run in there, or maybe for candy, I'd go in there if I had a taste for gum or for candy. So I would go in there and I would buy. So this one time, I walked out and my mom said, well, go get some bread next door. And so I went out and I went to the place next door, and the door opened and rang the bell, and so I looked and I took what I wanted from there, and this lady came out from the back, you know, and in the back she had this little, what do they call it?
Kind of like they used to play cards back there?
No, they didn't. They would just come, but instead of having a bar like we had a bar, she had only the liquor served in her kitchen, and majorities these people were Lithuanian people because she was from Lithuania, and there were a lot of young bachelors that lived in that area and worked, and so she knew a lot of those people, and she was married because she was married to an Irish man. she was working, and her name was Vera Ryan was her name, because she married this guy, and she had a little girl, maybe about 5 years old at the time. So she was kind of big, busty, like a Mae West type, you know, big curves and all that. And because she had this little store in the back, somebody knew that she was doing business back there. And so even the police knew that she was doing business, because some of the ones that were regular on the beat, they used to go in there and she'd give them a couple of drinks and send them out, you know. So they became her friends. And so this one time when I went into the store and I picked up my bread and that, and then she had this glass window into from the store that you can see even from the kitchen into the store. So when she looked out to see who was there, and she came out, and I paid her for the food, and I walked out of out of her store and into our place, and I just about had walked into the back of the house, and I had to wait for a little bit, so I didn't know what was wrong that she didn't come out to take care of me right away. So I went back to the kitchen, and then all of a sudden I hear police sirens, you know, and then my dad looked out and he says, "Oh, something's wrong next door." He says, "Something's wrong next door." He says, "The police went in next door," and so then we went out to see. And here the police were coming out of there, you know, and there was all kind of commotion. There was a police paddy wagon.
So you went in to go and try and buy stuff, and no one was there to help you, so you went back to your own restaurant?
No.
She came out and conducted the
She
sale.
took the money, you know.
Oh,
yeah.
I see.
She
Okay.
finished the sale. So then I came back, and when I came in the house, I wasn't in there 5 minutes, and all this happened
So it was
after
Go
I
at that
left.
person
Yeah.
and don't let her know anything's going on.
Right.
Type thing.
See, because that's what I think, that these thieves were in there.
Yeah.
And they must have said, "Get rid of her," you know. And so she came out, took the money, and
You were lucky.
and that was when the police came. And so then the police,
Who did they shoot though next door?
they shot, the one policeman was there.
There was a policeman
Because,
there?
see, she had this big table, and all these guys would sit around this table, and she'd have a bottle of beer, a bottle of liquor on the table, and then they'd serve each other themselves, you know.
Yeah.
And then they'd tell her how many drinks they had, and they'd pay her. So she was making a living doing that. And she was living high, because she used to go down Michigan Avenue and buy her clothes over there. And we were poor at that time. We couldn't afford to go on Michigan Avenue. She was going down Michigan Avenue buying all these sexy, fancy dresses, you know, and she had all these bachelors coming in there, you know.
So who got shot? A policeman?
So this time, when we found out then after this was all over, that these men came in to rob her, to rob her, because they knew she had this little place there for, I forget what they used to call those places.
Speakeasy?
Yeah, speakeasy. She had like a little speakeasy in her house. And so then she was serving there, you know, so they knew that she had money, and so they went there to rob her. And because they walked in and didn't know, and the policeman was there. And so then when they walked in, and the policeman reached for his gun, and they saw the policeman, so they went and shot him. So what they did is they shot him and they killed him. So then they were looking for these men, and then they did find.
They arrested
They
one
find.
guy.
They found.
And that was the guy that was innocent?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there were two. There were two of them, and so what they did, that they would come anytime. They would come, and she would have to go, because they wanted her to verify who these guys were.
Oh, like for a lineup.
Yeah,
They'd have
yeah.
guys and they wanted to come
So
downtown and see.
she used to get so mad, because for a long time they kept bothering her. They kept bothering her, and she had to get in their car and go with them and see if it. So this
So you were in there?
Just before it happened. And in fact, it could have been.
They
They
could have
already
been.
shot the
They
policeman?
could have been
Right
there.
after she left, I think, Randy.
They could have been in there, and I don't know. They could have had him shot
Couldn't you have
already.
heard the gunshots?
Well, I don't know if you'd hear it next door, because this was on such a busy
Oh, I see,
street
I
and
see,
that,
I see.
so it wasn't a very quiet area. So they could have been, but I don't
So
know.
the story the movie has is that the man who was arrested for it, was he killed?
So the
Was he
story that they had.
executed?
in jail for a long time.
So this
And that he
policeman
was
was
innocent.
killed. And so they finally, she said, well, I got tired, and she said, they said, yeah, that, she says, well, I think that this might be the man.
So she said just to
thought
leave me
that-
alone, this
yeah.
is the guy.
She
Right.
says that, well, I just think that this is probably the man.
And
So,
didn't the reporter finally get her to admit to that?
well,
she didn't
yeah,
know it?
yeah, well, that's what they were trying to show,
In the
that
movie.
that the mother finally did help that guy get out of there after about 12 years. He was in the prison for 12 years, and this Jimmy Stewart was supposed to be the guy that was looking for this murderer of the policeman. So he was looking to see what he can find out, because the mother said that her son is innocent, and she will scrub floors and do anything. And she used to cry to Jimmy Stewart to help her, because you should see if you can rent that movie.
Yeah, it was a
And-
good movie,
yeah.
and how he found
So
out.
where'd they get the name Northside 777?
Well, because when they made this movie, they made it that it happened on the north side.
But
but
it's not
I-
in Chicago, no.
But, yeah,
But it happened on the south side.
but I know where it happened, and they were saying that it was a Polish neighborhood, and this were Polish people, where I know this woman was Lithuanian. They were my next door neighbors,
So
and-
Northside 777 is the address, supposedly?
I guess so. I think that must have been the address of the place that they. And so that's where they went to look for a place that would kind of look
Resemble?
like this store business was.
If they're doing a true story, why don't they just do it the way it was?
I
Why don't
know.
they
Well,
change it?
they probably didn't get to talk. If they'd have come to me, maybe I would have told them. They could have paid me for it.
They should have had a little girl go in there that would have been you, Gran.
Yeah.
They write them into the script. A little girl that
Right.
goes in there to
Hey,
buy bread and candy.
that's why I
and then
said-
leaves just
That's
in
why I
time.
said, because I
So
thought,
you go, oh God, is she gonna get killed?
that's why I said, because I remember her name, that what her
Is
name
that her
was.
name in the
Vera.
movie?
That was her name.
Vera?
No, her name was not Vera. But I know what her name was, because she was my next door neighbor, And then there were times when she'd go down to Michigan Avenue and she'd buy these heels. Because I figured I'd make a real sexy story out of this, and say that even today, that she's an old lady, and that she would be sitting there and just thinking and reliving what had happened, I was thinking that that's the kind of story I would make.
And then they made a movie out of it before you got a chance to?
No, I was thinking that now I would make this movie, and maybe I could make some money on it.
Yeah, but you can't copy the movie if they already made one.
No,
You can make a
no.
different movie. But you know
But
what
I
they
would
just
tell
tell-
her
they
life
tell me?
story. See, their story is about the woman who saved her son. But
Yeah,
what I
you
would be
tell
telling,
Vera's
I would be
Story.
telling the story about Vera, how she came to this country, how she went to work, how she married this Irish man, and that why she had an Irish name. And then she was, after she was divorced, she had this little girl, and my next door neighbor, I had a girlfriend who was my age. She lived on the other side of this, of her. We lived on this side, and she lived on the north side of this woman. But she was such a close friend with this Vera, and her name was Helen. And I stood up to her wedding. In fact, I have wedding pictures of her.
Yeah.
So this Helen she used to love that little girl. So she used to take her over to her house all the time and play with her and take her to shop with her, and she'd buy her toys
You know
and
what?
everything.
What?
They told me in the screenwriting class that there's a guy who went to SMU that did the screenplay for Hook, Peter Pan movie,
Yeah.
and he did the screenplay for Dracula. And there's another guy who the teacher's gonna try to get him to come and talk to us. He lives in Austin now, and he went to SMU, and he sells all these screenplays, but none of them have ever gotten made. But they said that these movie studios, you write your screenplay and you give them in, and then they have a reader, which is like somebody that could be my age, out of college that they hire. You get like so much money per script, and you read them, and then you go, yes, this is good, or no, if you don't get past the reader, you don't get done at all. But some studios will buy screenplays for like $60,000. But then it's their idea, and whatever they do with it after that, you don't have any control over. But this guy who's so rich, he sold like all these screenplays, but none of them ever got made. But he'll sell them, and they get $60,000 for one, or
Is
like
this
a
still
whole bunch.
on?
So he'll
Is
meet,
it still on?
yeah, he'd meet people that say, what have you done that I've seen? Because he's a screenwriter and he's got lots of money because of it, but none of them ever got made, so he has to go, nothing. None of them ever get made. But you could get $60,000 for one screenplay.
Yeah, maybe we're gonna
And then
go-
sometimes if they like it and they like what you do, then they'll say, okay, we buy this for $60,000, but we want you to rewrite. So they pay you more money to do the next writing of
Rewrite
it.
it.
You know, the trouble is, Debbie, that nowadays everybody's looking for trash. You know,
Yeah, but
everybody's looking for trashy things.
with this.
What do you say you can't write when this guy gave you
Yeah, I can
writing
write
class?
English. I can write grammatically correct things, but I can't make up stories.
I know, but he was telling you how good and talented you are writing, remember?
So that's why I'm telling you that you have to just don't make all the stories out of you gotta make that gives you just an
Five
idea,
real stories.
and you add to it. You know,
Yeah.
that's what this is just a.
That's what I need, because I'm
see-
sitting here thinking I have no basis on
Yeah.
which to make.
Well,
the
see,
movie.
because what you have to do is you start out with who the family is. You know, you start out with the family names and the year they were born.